general protocol spaces, banking on freedom.
So anyway, yeah, the article, yes, Jonathan, the one that you mentioned, I was going back through that to see the history, and it's kind of insane that you wrote that article 2 years ago. Um, it's been a lot of work to go from the original idea, which is really pretty simple idea, to a full product, and we're finally there at a full product, something that actually works and people can use, and it's a protocol, it's all open source, or all the protocol parts of it are open source, and the libraries and everything are open source. And what is it that took so long to get there is kind of one thing I want to talk about, like let people know, because if you're wanting to build an application or wanting to build some kind of protocol or something on Bitcoin Cash, what does it take to do that? And then all the discussion we have had about native BCH wallets, our kind of assertion about that is that once we have that kind of thing, the development time of this, which has been so long, would be just dramatically shortened to a very short time period where people have an idea, they get a good contract, they get it, audited and reviewed very carefully, and then they can deploy an app very quickly once they have native BCH as an assumption for wallets. So that's another thing to talk about. And then the other is all of the cool stuff that's still possible with any hedge and just generally with tokens and smart contracts. What kind of things can we do going forward? So those are the three things I was wanting to talk about. Jonathan, what what took so long? Like why?
Took so long? Yeah, that's a very wide and open-ended question that depends on what you're looking at. Like, why did it take so long to write the actual contract code in the first place? Well, the answer to that is that we had to start by custom make it with opcodes and just try to create transaction entirely by hand without any kind of tooling or infrastructure to help us. And that was kind of hard, particularly the debug side. And after how
Right,
long did we do that? That must have been
dude.
like at least a couple months of like figuring out that part until Spedden
Oh
came
yeah, man.
along and like, here you can write it in a bit more high level and we'll compile it down for you. And then CashScript came along
Oh,
at some point, and yeah,
well, even before that, remember, it was so pathetic at the beginning because this is what led to our experience, is what led to us pushing for the establishment of the BCH spec as a document, as a an actual document that you can go look at, because our experience was, okay, we need to construct contracts and we need to, even just
yeah,
constructing transactions, it was impossible to find documentation for what to do.
yeah.
Literally the node was the spec, and then we also had to look at, like, we were like opening up old Bitcoin Wikipedia entries and like looking at these like super janky low resolution JPEGs of like transaction construction. It was ridiculous.
I'd say the most painful thing about that was the like, what do you sign when you sign something? Because well, we had like our keys and we had the data we thought we wanted to sign, but we have to make it function so that we could do introspection. And so we needed to know how transaction signing worked under the hood. And you could probably, dig in a node software and figure it out that way, but we naively assumed that it would be as simple as just Googling for what do you sign, and kind of finding some spec sheet somewhere that says this is the data that is being assigned and this is how you put it all together. But it turns out there was like 3 or 4 of them, and everything was outdated or for something else. And we had literally no sensible documentation to work off. And when you do sign something, you sign a hash of it, and the signature is also very non-human friendly. So you're looking at a hash and a signature of a hash, and you wonder, did I do it right? And you have no debugging tools. the only way you move forward is if the Bitcoin Cash network actually accepts your transaction. And if it doesn't, you're back to trying to think about like what could have gone wrong and what documentation might not say the right thing. Did I misinterpret some documentation somewhere? Yeah, that was a nasty period.
We threw a lot of sats that are going to be permanently part of deflation into these little contracts. we man, I wish we had recorded all those. We have a very long list of effectively burned tokens put into contracts, because sometimes it was like, oh well, this doesn't work, and then you'd submit a transaction and the network is like, okay, that one's okay. Oh, okay, fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember the day.
And then Meep. When did Meep come along? So Meep is a tool
I was just gonna say that.
that was with BCHD. That's a full node software, BCHD, written in Go. And that software, Chris Pacia wrote a little utility on top of it called Meep, and that would let you take a smart a contract, a contract transaction, an input really, and it would let you kind of look at that like a normal debugger in software, if you're familiar with software debugging. So you could kind of step by step go through your contract and see what's happening in terms of the Bitcoin Cash program, the virtual machine, the consensus code. And that was such a godsend to have that we could just step through contracts and see what was happening.
Indeed. See where it went wrong.
And then at least we could see which hash was wrong. Because like Jonathan was saying, in normal debugging, you can see like, oh, this value is 3 and this value is 10. Oh yeah, everything looks right. But when everything is a hash, it's just like giant 64 character thing. I don't know. You have no way to know what the status of that or what it means internally. So yeah, Meep was a huge one. Hopefully Meep will make a comeback, right? There's this Flipstar that was made by Operaturn to bring BCHD back into spec.
Very
and then
kind of
you have to
unlikely.
upgrade Meep.
What will happen though, if I understand the people over at CashCrypt right, is that they're gonna integrate BitAuth so that it's easier to go from a contract file to the BitID debugging tools, which can do similar things. So we'll have something.
Right. That's right. Yeah, what was after the Dark Ages? Like that was a really bad Dark Ages. But it started good things, right? It started the spec, because we pushed hard to get a BCH spec so that at least other people don't have to go through the Dark Ages.
Yeah.
And then what else good came out of that? I mean, we didn't develop Meep.
The death and ultimate burn down of the Bitbox SDK. Yeah, so some backstory. Back in many years ago, Bitcoin.com focused heavily on expanding the BCH ecosystem in various ways. And one thing they did was that they hired people to build things for it, of which the Bitbox software development kit, a library for JavaScript and TypeScript that was supposed to make it really easy to work with Bitcoin Cash oriented things like sending a transaction and finding data and whatnot. And that toolkit was actually pretty useful, but it was horribly unreliable on the network side of it. And it was public and it was free. So a lot of people started using it, which just made the situation worse. We
and it was great to be fair to it, right? It was great if you wanted to do one thing, and that's send and receive simple BCH transactions. It was great for that. Well, from a developer's perspective, it was great.
Yeah, it was simple when it worked. Like when it worked, it was good. Yes. But it didn't always work to just send and receive. And the data structure were a bit inconsistent, and the documentation wasn't perfect and whatnot. But that happens pretty much everywhere. But the big part was that you couldn't really rely on it. So if you made applications built on top of it, one day they worked, the other day they didn't. And the only way for you to figure out what was wrong is to try and debug, and often things would just go away on their own and start working again, and then they would break down like some hours later, and you'll be back where you started. Very, very unreliable. So I'm happy that it's gone.
I think that was as much as I appreciate what they did, I think that was a big part of what led us towards doing things that you kind of operate yourself and you can depend on yourself, right? Was that basically the origin of Electrum Cache?
Yeah, that was the motivation for building Electrum Cache, but I wasn't alone in thinking that you need to self-depend. The Permissionless Software Foundation, for example, Chris Troutner, he also set up his like things in a box, easy deploy with support and whatnot. So yeah.
Right. And then Electrum Cache, just so nobody gets it confused, this is a very nice piece of software, kind of infrastructure software that Jonathan wrote, which is not the Electron wallet. This is the Electrum Cache library, which lets your app or whatever code that you're writing talk to the Bitcoin Cash network without having to have a node or without having to know all the details of how the network works. Jonathan can probably give a better description, but just to be clear, it's not the Electron wallet. This is a infrastructure library.
Yeah. Long story short, the network side of Bitbox was inconsistent, so that's the part to actually fix. And I looked around at like, what things do we have? What are my options? And it turns out that the Electron wallet uses a protocol called Electrum, and they have plenty of different indexing servers that operates on that network, and there's many public-facing ones. So I figured if I wanted to have consistency and reliability, one crucial aspect of it would be being able to do fallback, right? Talk with one server, and if it doesn't respond, go talk to some other server. And so I chose to build a library to make it easier to do this server communication, and also while doing that, set it up in such a way that you can set up clusters of servers without having to know much about how to do clustering of servers. You just give it a list of servers that are interesting to talk to. They all serve the same content, so it's fine, even if you take servers who aren't well known or aren't publicly like audited or whatever. And then whenever you want to receive, well, the server that tells you first, or maybe you wait until 2 out of 3 servers have told you about something before you trust the data. And then the library I wrote just gives you an event to act on. If you broadcast on one server is not there, then the other servers will have broadcast and they will give you the response and you can move on. So your application doesn't have to deal with the clustering of services to get that fall over and the other benefits you get from having a cluster.
Well, yeah, so there's that, but then just even before that, if you had an app and you wanted to talk to the Bitcoin Cash network, you're in a really tight spot because you either use this absolutely massive Bitbox thing that you had to just throw into your app, which behaved in some special ways.
Don't remind me, Bitbox was huge.
Yeah, it was huge. Or which is bad for like mobile apps and, just generally being available to anybody in the world. So, or, you talk directly to a node, which is its own huge hassle, and
you can't talk directly
you don't even want to do that in an app. That just doesn't even work. So yeah, before that, not only the clustering, but just generally talking to the network was a big hassle to do. So yeah, that software has been fantastic. I think a lot of people use it. Have you checked the stats on it in a while?
I'm gonna go check now just because I'm curious. But
okay.
As you said, it has seen quite a bit of usage. I know that even Troutner rearranged his stack and removed away from Bitbox on it over to Electrum Cache. So everything that's on top of him is also falling under this. So looking at npm.js website, we have 350 weekly downloads, which isn't a very high number, but it's also very consistent and it's not a small number. And there are 15 other packages that depend on it. Some notable packages in there, I can say mainnet, which people use as an alternative to Bitbox today. There's CashScript. There's the vote contract that Bitcoin Unlimited use for their voting application, VotePeer. There's AnyHedge, obviously, that we do ourselves. And there's unspent files, various versions of contracts. There's Hopcash Bridge, but that's been shut down. And more, lots more.
Yeah, and those are the public ones. There's surely some private ones as well in development. So anyway, that's been I don't know. I think it's kind of been become a kind of foundational piece of BCH development.
Yeah, at least on the mobile
But back to the
web development stack. If you're not doing web development, then of course there are other alternatives for you.
There are, but not as easy. If we go back to the history, I was thinking at that point, because it's hard to put myself back at that point in time. But if we go back there, because if we're talking about the development of an app and what you'd have to go through to develop an app, because say somebody's listening right now and they're like, okay, I have this amazing idea. There's going to be a smart contract and I know exactly how it works and I know how CashScript works and I can write the contract. And then what? Right? Like, because that's where we were at that point. We were like, okay, now what do we do? You remember the Discord stuff that you made?
Yeah.
That was what was next, right? That's what we did next.
Do we have screenshots?
Because at that point we didn't have.
Do we have screenshots of the old Discord contract making?
I'll see if I can dig them up. I'll put them
That'd
on
be
Twitter
awesome to share.
Yeah. Can you describe that just real quickly, like what that bot did? Not what it did,
yeah,
but what it looked like.
We needed a way to demonstrate that, hey, this actually works and we can do things with it. It's no longer like manual transactions. And we need to show it to people who might invest and help us actually make it a reality. And so what I did was that I made a Discord bot. So you typed something, like you sent a message to it and you told the parameters of a contract you'd like to make. And it would create that lock script, that contract in the background, and then it would respond back to you with like, this is the contract parameters, this is the expected behavior of the contract, here's how much leverage it's going to have and whatnot. And then if you set like a thumbs up emoji to the contract, it would go to the next step and it would tell you like, here's the QR code, here's how much money you need to put in, and then you pay the money in and it would detect the money and like print out the funding transaction after the contract had been funded. It was actually the first peer-to-peer version of AnyHedge we had, but we opted not to lock ourselves to Discord because that would be a very small user base, and instead build a website to let people interact with it.
And at this point, I'm just remembering things as they come up. At this point, we had thrown away so much money in small contracts because there was no hope to do this on testnet. Like we were barely able to get onto mainnet with all of this stuff. Bro. Like doing this on testnet was just not even a possibility. So we had thrown away so much money in tiny amounts that we were like, okay, we're gonna do like a real contract, and we're like, okay, if it fails, I'll pay you back. Stuff like that. And the contract we did, I think, was like $10
something like that. Yeah,
that was such a big deal back then, just because I mean the expectation was that it was gonna go poof when we did it, but it worked. And I don't think we lost any money after that, right? Like it stabilized quickly, and we've been extremely careful. I don't even know how to describe how much time I've spent on the safety of that contract. But
Oh,
yeah, we've been extremely conservative about making sure that it's safe. And after we got all these fundamentals out of the way, I don't
uh,
I don't think there was any money after
so
that.
some context. This was at a time where there was no native introspection in the BCH protocol, so we
Yeah.
had to kind of take an external signature, recreate the entire transaction, validate the signature, and then derive data out from that transaction in order to make the contract work. We were hitting the limitations of the BCH contracts frequently, like there's too many opcodes here, there's too long items on the stack, you can't do this push operation and whatnot. And on top of that, we did not have 64-bit numbers. We only had 31-bit numbers. And when you're doing financial operations and you're trying to do calculations, you need precision. But 31 bits and restricted only to integers is kind of, well, not easy to do, right? And so we ended up doing a workaround in which we computed two different numbers, and then we mashed them together so that we'd retain some precision. But all these workarounds, they come with complexity, they come with a larger surface area for things that can go wrong. And so we actually even went out of our way back then and paid a guy, Litcho, Carol, to go through and mathematically prove what the largest possible inaccuracy we could have was, like cascading all the errors and show us like how bad can we actually get, to ensure that we were always going to be within like 0.1%. Otherwise, it wouldn't be worth trying to make a company product on top of this. Of course, today that is not as relevant. We have 64-bit numbers now. We can do both multiplication and division in script. We don't have to do a bunch of workarounds. And we have native introspection, so we're not hitting the edge cases anymore, and everything is pretty much straightforward. The contract is actually very clean and very straightforward now. It doesn't contain any hacks or workarounds at all anymore.
Oh, sorry. I thought I was muted, but you probably heard me like wildly clicking in the background. I found those old images from
You
Discord.
did?
So I was just digging while you were talking. Yeah, I found them.
Right.
But this was like after it had gone like in through several iterations of development. But I'm gonna share some of those in a minute once I get a chance.
Yeah.
I'll show an example of what it looked like to set up a contract on Discord. If you're listening, you might be wondering like, wait, why isn't there a thing on Discord that you could use now to do this? And the answer to that is because that if it's going to be easy, like it was, using this thing was actually quite easy. Like you just like clicked emojis to set up the contract, like thumbs up to approve and stuff like that. But was for that to be easy, it was custodial, right?
Yeah.
So there was a bot in the background that was taking money and then creating contracts, which is bad.
Yeah.
Right? That's very bad. But it was super easy and it worked well. But that again, this points to the same thing that we keep coming back to over and over again, which is without a native stack, you're reduced to that basically. You do a custodial setup, which is horrible, or you have a very complex setup of like copying and pasting, like Flipstarter. If anybody's used Flipstarter with the plugin, you're reduced to that, where you're like sending this blob of unreadable, useless data that you can't understand from one place to another and then approving it. It's a really bad user experience. So the reason that's not there is because it would be totally custodial, and we don't do custodial things. Somebody could do it.
Oh.
So I'm going to put these screenshots up, and somebody could do it if they really wanted to.
Yeah, I have to interject, John. We do have a few second temporary custody where your browser takes custody of your fund when you're using BCH Bull before it funds a contract. So saying we don't do custodial is almost 99% right, but there's a small caveat there until we get that native wallet stack, and then we can finally be super proud and say we have nothing that is custodial in here.
Yeah, but just to make sure that that part is clear to anybody who's listening, that's in your browser, right? That's not going to us in any way. That process that happens, that very short process he's talking about, is something that happens in your browser. So that is an app that's provided by us, but that's not something that is sent to us. So it's still non-custodial if you think of the app and the browser as being in your control, which is not a great perfect assumption, which is Jonathan's point. And that's the point of the native wallet, is that once you get to that point, you don't even have to worry about that. You literally, the only time you spend money, you're going to know, and your wallet's going to know exactly how it's being spent. Yeah. All right. There was that. Oh, God. And then there was the real. Okay. Yeah, we won't even talk about it. Then there was Flipstarter, because everything just got interrupted at that point, right? It was like, never mind, all this stuff you've been working on, forget that. Bitcoin Cash is about I don't know if anybody here was in favor of the whole ABC I'm just gonna call it a tax because it's easy. If anybody was in favor of the whole tax system, I'm sorry, but we thought that was one of the dumbest things we'd ever heard. And we spent a lot of work to make Flipstarter and help with BCHN and all that stuff. So we're not going to talk about that.
Well, we can talk about it from a different context. So let me put this. So imagine you're a founding company and you want to make a product, and you're looking at the various places and ways you can do that. So in the crypto ecosystem, you could choose a chain, or you could choose a Labbits, whatever. In this context, we were looking at like, how do we build this contract so they can actually get to the point in the future where things are non-custodial, and this is a really strong foundational component that we can later build upon. And our decision back then was obvious, right? There's one chain that scales with strong technical merit, and then there's a lot of chains that are experimenting, doing a lot of different things, and some of those might succeed. So I'm not here to say that like all other chains are bad in any way, but we identified Bitcoin Cash as a chain that has serious power to scale, has serious staying power, has been around for a long time, and had the basic components that we needed that not all other chains have. But what it did not have is the largest and strongest user base to target with your product. It did not have all those customers that we would have really wanted. And we decided that we're going to try anyway. And so we built all the way up to this point. And then the lead maintainer of the lead full node decides that it's a good idea to change the Bitcoin protocol, to take money from the miners and give it to not miners. And from our perspective, that was going to shatter the little user base group we have, right? The addressable audience was going to go from small to we can't run a company anymore. And so for us, this was a do or die moment. And since the entire situation revolved around like, how will we fund this ecosystem? We sat down and we looked at it and we said, you know what? People get funded if they do things other people want. Right? That's a fundamental truth that underlies everything here, right? Provide value and you'll get help, like when possible. And so we decided to build what Mike Hearn tried to do when he set up Lighthouse back in many, many years before, and make a fundraising platform that's entirely non-custodial. And that became Flipstarter. And it successfully raised money for every single node development team in our ecosystem, except for the one who wanted a tax. And it kept on providing fundraising for various projects and services across the ecosystem. It is still active today. It's probably one of the strongest success stories in the Bitcoin Cash space so far.
To be fair, I made sure that we were very fair, and Flipstarter didn't was as absolutely neutral as was possible to be and ABC was invited at every step to participate and use Flipstarter. We created the setup for them. We had it all done. There was no like Flipstarter didn't say anything against ABC. It was there, but they just chose not to use it. Just to clarify.
Yeah,
That,
we even gave them feedback on their campaign, gave them recommendations for how to make it better and so on. But they were kind of set in that we don't need to do all this work to prove to the community why we are valuable, and the community responded accordingly.
Yeah, so I was like, we're not gonna start any fires, and Jonathan is like, what's the best one?
Yeah, I'm sorry,
Okay.
a bit of an arsonist today.
But on the point of developing apps, the Flipstarter used Electrum Cache. That was probably the first use of Electrum Cache.
Yeah.
In a finished product. Probably.
It wasn't a version 1 release of Electrum Cache. It's a very alpha-ish thing. But yeah, it had the basics. No clusters at that point, though.
So that was probably the first place. Yeah, nothing. It just worked. Bare bones. Yeah, but that was a long, painful, scary interlude. Not because we wanted to control, as Jonathan said, BCH. There's been some crazy things where people are like, oh, they want to control BCH, and we're like, no, we just like that doesn't make any sense at all for us. And well, we personally didn't think it made any sense for BCH either. But yeah, no. So anyway, through that, we started doing public sponsorships. I'm just looking at your article. We did the sponsorships to tell everybody, like, hey, look, it's really important to support infrastructure. So please support CacheScript and LibAuth and Electrum Cache. And well, we didn't say Electrum Cache because we were making that. But what else did we have on there? Anyway, support all of those things, and we still do that to this day. So every quarter, we send very small sponsorship because we're not rich, but we send a very small sponsorship in line with our revenue to the projects that we depend on, and we really appreciate them. And yeah, I hope other people will do the same thing. Oh, what was after that? What came next? Oh God, the Chainlink thing, right? When we talked with Chainlink, right? Because this is back to the point where, okay, you've got a contract and you know it works. What else do you have to do to make it work? Like, what if you just made a list, Jonathan, of all the things that we had to do to make it work? No explanation, just a list of the things.
Oh, well, we had to make a contract. We had to make tooling to talk with the network. We had to set up oracles. We had to make a front end where people can interact with it. We had to make a back end that can take the other side of the deal. So we have to recruit liquidity to that back end. And we had to figure out the market making algorithms that make that back end not run out of money.
And each of those was like a whole adventure on its own. And with oracles, we've had many people come and say, oh, you should just use Chainlink, right? Because that's an easy thing to say if you don't understand how things actually work. And Chainlink is a EVM, an Ethereum virtual machine design. The whole thing is completely based on all of the stuff they do is completely based on EVM or some very similar setup. And that stuff is just not at all compatible with UTXO, with the design of UTXO. And we had a talk with them back in, I don't know, 2019, I think it was. And at that time, the ETH gas, like the usage hadn't blown up quite as much, and the fees were not quite as bad, but they were still already, even back then, at the point of like, stuff is kind of not working so well because just dragging a price into your app costs a huge amount of money for just a single use of the Oracle. So I think they were looking for alternatives, but they didn't take it seriously. The UTXO model wasn't really something they took seriously. So we tried back then to see if they would get involved and run oracles and do something interesting with oracles, but they weren't really into it.
I wouldn't have taken
and
them
that's been the
seriously
story.
I mean, look at Bitcoin Cash at the time were like 30 or so in the coin market cap rankings, and we have gone through at least 2 splits, social split where people leave the platform for other things. And the other chains that are UTXO compatible that might be like interesting to support from their perspective, they did not build strong smart contract infrastructure. That was not a priority on their ends, and still not a priority to this day. So it would be a quite risky thing to bet on, right? After all, Bitcoin Cash had absolutely zero smart contract features that needed an oracle at the time, other than the budding little anyheads that wanted to do something about it.
The little contract that could, yeah, we, yeah, exactly. And that's kind of been the story of everything we've done, where we're like, hey, this is something that needs to be done. We can do it. It doesn't make sense for us to do it, but nobody else is going to do it. So there we go. So we do it. Yeah, that's been the Oracle's helping with liquidity provision, the front end, all that stuff, right? You just gotta throw it out
Yeah,
there
we
and make
actually,
each part of it, and then sort it out
before we
later.
skip too far into the future, so we did set up our oracles, but we actually did try and find partnership and outsource the front end and the liquidity provision to a third party who is dealing with payments and things like that. And they set up a platform called
Right.
DToken, which ran for a couple of months and was ramping up and scaling up and was looking real good. And then they shut down entirely and didn't want to do anything anymore because they had, in my opinion, way too many bugs and way too high support costs and not much profit.
Yeah, that was painful. So imagine BCH Bull, except you can. How long was it? Every contract is exactly
The,
5x
their,
and one
their
day,
contracts
right? Wasn't it?
had fixed
Or
3x
3x?
leverage and fixed 24-hour
3x.
duration.
Yeah,
And you could just choose which side of the contract to be in. Everything was entirely fixed in that market.
that's right. That's right. It was one day 3x, and it was a very small maximum amount. I think it was
But they were growing, right? Usage were
$1,000.
growing quite fast. If you look at the graphs from back in the day, and people did like the product. So either they were bleeding money somehow, or they just couldn't afford to pay all those support costs. Something financially had to not have worked out for them to actually shut down
Yeah.
when having that success growth.
Yeah, it was unfortunate. We really appreciated D-Token taking that up and 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 going for it and seeing if they could make it work. And yeah, it's too bad that it didn't work out for them, because we've never wanted to be the front end. We never wanted to do this stuff, right? It's just you do what you got to do.
Yeah, I think when we started talking about making a company, the plan for how we were gonna make buy and earn our money was essentially to be a valuable automation tool, right? We were gonna do the settlements for these things, and then people were gonna do any hedge contracts in a lot of different ways on top. And we would take a very, very small percentage to ensure that everything runs stable and consistently. That was our plan, and boy, have we had to do more than that in order to get where we are.
Yeah, but actually the plan is still working. It's just we had to do a lot more to get there, to
Yeah,
get to that point. And that's a key point, that the business model that we have is one of the very few in crypto that's not speculative, right? Our income is not speculative income, it's services income. That's very rare. We're not doing what exchanges do, which is well, they're supposed to be services, but in reality they're all some form of fractional, or participating in the speculation, or taking fees to encourage anyway. Our income is not speculation, and that has still worked. Like, that still works for us, and I'm very happy that we've been able to achieve that. On the topic of collaborations, it wasn't just Chainlink. We talked to, who did we talk to? CoinGecko, BitPay. Did we talk to BitPay? CoinGecko. I think we talked to BitPay, Chainlink, and some others about running oracles. Oh, yeah, there was a Blockchair, Coindance.
Yeah.
We talked to a bunch of people who it might make sense for them to run oracles and be in the business of, basically having a reputation to keep, where their reputation is very important. But yeah, there just wasn't enough going on with it for it to make sense to them. There was nothing going on with it except for our promise that we were building something. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it takes time for these things to mature. It takes time for these things to earn reputation and trust. So I would love it if things were going much faster than they are. But I think we've actually done a good job getting to this point.
Yeah, I think so. I was just gonna say one more thing. One of the scars that I have is, if anybody looks at the old original AnyHedge contract and compares it to today, it's 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 incomparably simpler today than it used to be because of, like Jonathan said, we got the introspection and larger integers, and that just achieved a huge simplification. We have an article somewhere where we describe that, but it's really hard to describe what a simplification that did. And even more than the code simplification, it was a risk simplification and risk reduction, because with simpler systems and simpler contracts, you get a drastic reduction in the amount of edge cases and corner cases that you have to think about and cover. So yeah, that was a huge improvement once BCH was able to get those upgrades.
It also provided a significant improvement to precision. And so before, we could do contracts of maybe a tenth of a dollar, and it would have acceptable but not good precision. But if we did a hundredth of a dollar, the precision would start to actually matter. But now we don't really have that as a problem anymore. You can do very small contracts if you, for some reason, would want to do that.
Right. Okay, enough war stories and funny stuff. Oh, and just actually, no, I lied. One more thing. I really appreciate the Bitcoin Cash City conference
Ooh.
that happened in 2019, that was organized by the great people there in Townsville. Um, that was such a good conference. It was so productive. We got a ton of work done. We learned new things. The Bitcoin Cash spec was born there. Electrum Cash may have been born there also. A lot of things happened there, and it was such a good experience. So I just wanted to give a shout out and say thanks to those guys for organizing it. Yes, and the future. A little bit about the future. So what we're working on right now with the AnyHedge contract and BCH Bull. The first one is early redemptions, which means, or early settlements, which means, you make a contract for 30 days, but then 10 days into it, you decide, you know what, I need that liquidity. Whether you're up or down, whatever the position is, you say, I need to get out of this contract. In the current setup, you can't. It's just not possible. The contract has a facility for that, has a way to do that, but it's disabled due to, again, reasons related to not having a native stack. But we found a way to do that in some reasonable way that's reasonably safe. And so that's going to be enabled, and you'll be able to say, hey, I want to end this contract. And the liquidity provider says, okay, well, if you want to end it, that puts me in a better or worse position. And so this is going to be the fee to end the contract early. That's it. So that will be available soon. You can end your contracts early. And then the other one we're working on is leveraged shorts, which I don't know, for many people, it sounds like a bad thing when they hear that leveraged shorts. But remember, AnyHedge is all about bringing usage and utility, increasing utility of Bitcoin Cash. And if people are shorting Bitcoin Cash using Bitcoin Cash, that's bullish, right? It's like whenever you take a long position on something in a regular, any kind of exchange, The other way to look at that is that you're taking a short on the US dollar, but nobody considers that to be, oh my God, that's going to destroy the dollar. No, it's just because, that's the unit of account for those systems, or the euro or whatever. And it's the same here. Whatever it is you want to do financially, you can do that on Bitcoin Cash. And you're using Bitcoin Cash in the contract. So leverage shorts has a bunch of things that it enables. And it also is going to hopefully bring in a different class of user who have different needs, to balance out and increase the volume of usage on BCH. One of the uses for that, just the simplest use of it, is, many people who are listening might be familiar with AnyHedge and the idea that you can get stability. You can get stability on 10 ounces of gold, or $10,000, or whatever it is. You want to get stability so that a month from now, you still have the same purchasing power in those terms, gold, US dollars, silver, whatever it is that you're using. So that's there. With leverage shorts, you can effectively achieve the same thing for much cheaper if you're willing to take a little risk that the price doesn't increase a lot. So if you're willing to take a small risk that the price doesn't increase a lot, that's equivalent to a leveraged short. So you get to take the hedge position, you put a certain amount into that hedge position, and you keep the other part that you didn't have to put into it. And then you can use that. So you have more liquidity, or people say higher capital efficiency. So you're able to use that money instead of having to put it all in. The cost of that is you have to take that amount worth of risk, which translates to a liquidation price that's a high liquidation price. So if the price goes up to a certain amount, then the contract gets liquidated, and the other side of the contract gets all the money. So that's not for everyone, obviously, but it is something for more sophisticated people who want to take some risk and able to get more capital efficiency. And that kind of person is the one that we want to draw into BCH. This is the people who are traders, or they like these kind of positions, but they don't like the current setup because they can only get leverage in one direction. They can't get leverage in both directions. So this kind of completes the AnyHedge contract into a basic financial product that works for anybody. Did I yeah, but that's the basics. That's like the two small things that we're going to get done to kind of wrap up the AnyHedge contract itself. Jonathan, what do you think about the other things? Should I talk about options, or what do you think would be the other good things to talk about?
We might have a couple people listening that are interested in the BCH Build Future part, but the other things, the options contract and that, they are quite far away. So I don't think it matters that much. There are other things positive in BCH's future that we could talk about, though. If you want to talk about possible good futures.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it. We're gonna wrap up soon, probably, but yeah, go for it.
Yeah. All right. So I'll go back a little bit in the discussion and say that, like, we had a time when we started building these things, and it took us a very long time to get done because we had to implement a lot of things, and some of them over and over. For example, when Bitbox got away, we had to re-implement the things that were network oriented on that when we built Electrum Cash. Now, having spent a couple of years building on AnyHedge and BCH Build, building libraries, we have found more things that we find ourselves implementing over and over, and things that other developers, well, they really shouldn't need to go through that same process as us. They should learn from it and provide something that makes it easier for them to build new apps in the ecosystem. And so for quite a long time now, I've been sitting on a silent project, which I call Electrum SPV. It's a infrastructure library like Electrum Cash, but it sits on top of Electrum Cash. So there's a clear distinction between these two, that the Electrum cache talks to these indexing services with the Electrum protocol, but it does not understand what it's trying to communicate. Right? It just helps you talk with it. It doesn't know what you are talking about. That means it can be very, very small and slimline, and it can be very efficient. It doesn't take up much code, doesn't take up much memory. But it also means that the developers need to know what they are talking about in order to communicate effectively. Now, in the Electrum protocols, we have versioning. There are versions of that protocol. And with Electrum SPV, you sacrifice the versatility of being able to pick your version, which literally no one does these days, and you get locked into a specific version. And then the Electrum SPV library does understand what you're talking about. It does know like what the data that is being sent back and forth is, and so it can start making intelligent things to help you out. The first thing is that you go from having generic anytype calls where you don't know what data you're sending, don't know what data you're getting, to get a fully typed TypeScript experience for all the things that the Electrum protocol offers. Every single call in that network stack is fully typed. You also get to the situation where the library.
Let me say something real quick. So for people who aren't developers,
Right.
that's a really nice thing,
Right.
to not be working blind and have everything like meaningful pieces of code and data that you're working with, instead of just like, here's a blob, figure it out. So it's very helpful to have all this structure and typing in there.
Yeah. I don't know how many of the people listening are developers or not, so I'm gonna try to walk a tightrope line here and kind of quickly get to an end. So the other thing that it just difference, it knows the data that is being transferred back and forth, and some of that data is immutable. For example, a transaction cannot be changed after it happens, and what the Electrum SPV library will do, it will opportunistically cache that data, so that the application doesn't need to do caching. It can just ask for data, whichever data it wants. And if that data is immutable, it will be cached for them. And if it's not immutable, they shouldn't be caching it in the first place. And so it will be fetched from the network on demand as needed. And there are more things, but I forgot about them right now. Let's move on to something else.
Okay, all right. Yeah, there's so much good things that are possible, right? We didn't even talk about cache tokens. So cache tokens opens up a whole just so many different things that you can do, because as we were writing, when you're just writing with smart contracts,
yeah,
it you have to build in a lot of complexity in order to communicate from one contract to the next, and cache tokens just wipes out a lot of almost all of that complexity, so that you can have contracts building on top of each other. For example, take a contract position and you're like, okay, this is good, but I'm done with this one and I want to sell it. So instead of having to do some kind of early redemption, you just sell it on the market, and there's going to be somebody who's like, yeah, that's a standardized contract, just like any common, for example, futures market. There's a whole market for it, with a spot price and everything, just for taking, for buying and selling those standard positions. So that's a whole set of things that's possible, like with maybe going through Cauldron decks or some other ways. For example, flip starter that's done in some built-in stabilized way, where your contribution is actually in any hedge contract in dollar terms or gold terms or whatever. There's who knows? There's all kinds of possibilities. This is where you get into the whole Legos idea, which the EVM, the Ethereum ecosystem popularized. You can have these Legos that build on top of each other, except the UTXO model is actually more like the Legos, much more like the Legos than the EVM model is. And so you actually start to be able to get that thing where you can just compose contracts on top of each other and build who knows what. Like, who knows what's going to come out of that. There's nobody who can predict what's going to come out of that. So
hang on there. I believe that Jason is wanting to build a prediction market. Maybe he can predict what comes out of it.
Right. I wouldn't bet on it.
Yeah.
All right. I think we'll probably wrap up here. If there was any speakers, anybody who wanted to get up and say
Or
something,
ask. Ask is
if we
also
can't,
fine.
yeah, or ask, yeah, anything. Cheap
Good
Lightning,
job, guys.
did we do okay? Did we go off the track too far? How was it?
Yeah, great. A lot of history there, stuff I didn't know. I didn't know you guys had a Discord bot. That's pretty funny. Or if I did know, I forget. But yeah, lots of good history there. I think for people on the outside, it's like, one day suddenly BCH Bull is available, and I can put my money in this contract, and oh wow, the price went up, and yay! And they have no idea what was necessary to get to that point, right? Um, and that's the same with baking any kind of cake. You got to get all the ingredients together. And if you're not a baker, it's not obvious that that's what needs to be done. So I commend you guys. Excellent work. Good job. You've created something fantastic and very useful. And here's to further developments in the future.
Thank you. We really appreciate that, and we really appreciate everybody else. Like I said, GP depends on uh, many other projects and other people. So thank you, and we do our best to give credit whenever we can. One person I didn't mention was Bitcoin Cash Artist, who has done recently a huge amount in a short amount of time. So he's super helpful. Thank you to him. And I'm adding another tweet onto the thread here just to say thank you to our means General Protocols investors who have from that initial Discord bot, which we kind of self-funded everything up to that point. Um, that was a lot of work, but there's no way we could have gotten here without the investors. And I linked those articles because some of the investors like to be or willing to be public, but some of them don't want to be. So you know who you are, and if you want to know the names, the ones that are public are on the list there that I have, or on the articles that I have put in the thread. I'm afraid to say the names right here because some of them might not be. I forget which ones were public. So sorry about that. My bad memory. So yeah, thank you everybody for coming. Keep your pajamas on, stay warm, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care, everyone.